I know we just had lunch and maybe a beer, so ready for a nap. So I thought if you get tired of hearing me talk, there'll be a nice little slideshow you can zone out on. So I'm multitasking here. I'm talking about today really the evolving California cuisine that I know, that I'm a part of. And my multitasking is that you get little snippets of what State Bird is really about. And it's, oh, perhaps, come back to us. Okay, ready? It's searching right now, you can see that. This has been a really amazing couple of days and a lot to digest and think about from a number of the speakers, the conversations that have been taken place. Obviously, we're honoring a great California chef, Jeremiah Tower. And, you know, the other half of this that I think is really amazing is that Nicole and I spent kind of our formative years in Chicago and Michigan. And, you know, where we were chefs. I was a young cook, basically, in Chicago. But, you know, I'm born and raised in California and went to school in New York and moved to Chicago. Kind of, Nicole was still in college, and we were like, let's just meet in the center of the country and experience a different part of the country. And I remember in Chicago cooking and opening up boxes of produce. Obviously, this is in 1996 and 97 from California. And, you know, I always thought that that was, you know, it just kind of made sense, right? I mean, when I left, I went up to northern Michigan, and where I eventually met the Werps. And I really felt at that time that I was totally disconnected from any foodways. You know, growing up in California, you just have that connection. It's kind of a way of life, and we'll talk about identifying what California cuisine is. And moving up there, it sort of didn't reinvigorate, it just sort of confirmed what was really valuable and important to me. And farmers markets, I think there was one maybe up in Traverse City, maybe one in Petoskey. The restaurant I was in was a town of 400 people in Ellsworth, and everyone farmed in Ellsworth. So we didn't even go to farmers markets. You know, twice a week I would just get in my car and drive up to the farm and pick up stuff, leave a note, you know, what I grabbed. And then, you know, later on as I met folks like the Werps, you know, became this really cool thing called a delivery system that was really awesome. And, you know, there was just this keen interest in wanting to grow food for the restaurant. And so I didn't know what that meant. And I remember this one situation with a farmer who was a real, kind of an angry farmer. He was brilliant, but he was just an angry man. And I remember him coming into the restaurant, and I shit you not, he brought the most beautiful spinach. In hindsight, it was the most beautiful spinach. But I remember it came in, it was equal parts dirt and spinach. And I was like, I can't use this, right? Which is totally stupid. I was 25. I was, you know, had this mentality from the city boys. Maybe one of the first months I was up there. And he, I remember I was like, I can't use it. And he left. He was so pissed off at me, and he was so angry. And I was so angry too, because I was like, what the fuck? Why would you bring me this, you know, dirt with spinach in it? And, you know, but it was the start of a long and challenging relationship that I think we both really learned a lot from and gained. You know, he needed me to say something like that, and I needed him to express his dismay with me. And, you know, we talk about like the relationship, and that was really, it was a very, it was a huge thing. And I remember, this was my favorite, I think, story, and then we'll move on from Michigan to California. one of my favorite stories is that the first year I was up there, again, young, and I remember I wanted to do a corn soup. And you know, back in those days, I felt like I conceptualized food before I would order it, right? So I'd think about the dish I wanted to cook, and then I would order the ingredients based on that. It's not so much the case anymore. But at the time, that's what it was. And I remember it was June. Anybody in the Midwest are going to love this story, because I wanted to do corn soup. So I ordered corn, right? Got this beautiful yellow corn from California. Came in, and you know, our waiters and the people who worked for us were, basically farmers and farmers' wives and first grade teachers. Pretty, they just, corn, that didn't make sense to them. But they didn't tell me that. They said, I remember I put the dish on the menu, and it was this corn soup. And Gail, who was a 17-year waiter at the restaurant and a dairy farmer's wife, she says, corn? It's so early. Where did you get that? Who's growing this corn so early? And like right then and there, it just clicked. And I was like, I took it off the menu the next day and was like, wow, this totally doesn't make sense. I mean, knee-high by the 4th of July, corn not until mid-August is when it really starts coming. And I realized that this relationship and this thing between the land, the farmers who are stewarding the land, and the chefs who are really stewards of the farmers, right? And the guests, of course, you play this liaison between the two, and your staff and everything else. I realized that, I really had to think about where I was. And it started to change my perception on cooking. And over the years, I was a cook. I went up to northern Michigan to just put my head down and just cook, because I didn't want to be amongst all the city grit or I wasn't ready for that. So I thought, if I go up in the sticks, I can do something and just really teach myself how to cook. And over the time when I was up at Tapawinga, we started off with really about 3 to 4 consistent farms. And at the end of 4 years, we had 28 farms that we worked with pretty directly. And obviously the Werps were a huge part of that. And they grew the bulk of what we did, and everyone else would be little things, from maybe a guy who grew shallots, or a rabbit farmer, or a pheasant farmer, guy who culled pheasant eggs in the spring. So I got to see. I felt like I got an insider's perspective on true seasonality, true relationships between farmers, guests, cooks. I mean, I really got the full scope of it, and how important every person in this picture really is. Again, I grew up in California. My whole family, my wife's family, we both are Californians at heart. And at 2003, I think, was my last winter in Michigan, and it was so freaking cold. And I remember visiting my mom, and it was, 65 degrees, and we're walking on the beach in Santa Cruz, and it's like, I think it's time to come back to California. We planted stakes there, and, what a trip. California cuisine was really in that kind of maybe third phase of its evolvement at that time. I was fortunate enough to land at the chef gig at Rubicon Restaurant, and farmers markets were a reality, but they were the chef's market, right? Chefs would go to the farmers markets and shop, but not everyone. I mean, just a handful of us, and that's where we started to develop our culture. We started to develop life outside of the restaurant, right? Getting to know your other chef, starting to create a community. And all this is kind of going on symbiotically with vegetables, right? Maybe some eggs, throw some meat in there. and it's just, it really, this community is what became really important. And I realized that the community is big, and the community can be really strong, and it takes a lot of work, and everybody's so freaking busy. Every farmer, every chef, but those 2 hours or so spent at the ferry building or going to the Marin Market on Thursdays or the Tuesday afternoon market in Berkeley, you connect and you create this community. You're talking about ingredients. You're talking about techniques. We're all kind of salivating at the ripeness of the figs and, kind of feeding one another. I know it's California. It's what we do. We definitely geek out about this. So, at that time, I was still sort of in this, I had this like 1 foot in the Midwest sensibility and 1 foot in this California. I was like in both, right? I was still conceptualizing food and then ordering for it. And slowly it was like I was getting this crap coming in the door, and I was like, what's going on? This doesn't make sense, Does this salsify need to be on the dish in the summertime? Could I replace it with maybe beautiful ribs of Swiss chard, right? And I started really like playing with these ideas of what if, why, and slowly, and I was against it too. I was this like, young, slightly aggressive cook who was kind of, I'm anti most everything. I know I put up a great facade, but deep down, I'm sort of like against this conformity of like kind of going with the flow, right? And going to the farmer's market and kind of taking this, Shapenesian idea of like just cook what's beautiful. I still wanted to conceptualize. I wanted to play with flavors, and but slowly, those vegetables, they kind of grab you. They grab you by the ankles, by the wrists. They start changing the way you cut food. They start changing the way that you think about food. And all of a sudden, you're no longer conceptualizing the dish. You're thinking about the vegetable first and what you can do with it. That was amazing. And right around, I feel like, I was at 2004. 2006 was epic because that's where it all started changing. And every piece of vegetable that we would buy at the market, every fish that was local that would be coming in, it was like I was never satisfied with the fact that there'd be like great meat on the bone still. What do you do with that? It started to really change my philosophy and what is food. And I started questioning my own sort of values at the restaurant. Who am I cooking for? Certainly, at the time was cooking for some of my peers, those who were out to educate themselves. I was cooking for a restaurant devoted to wine and to service and sort of an old guard of running a restaurant. And things just start making sense, where we wanted to be. And I didn't know how that translated. Rubicon closed in 2008, which was really sad, but also like maybe the best thing that ever happened. Took 3 years out of restaurants, 3.5 years. Life just happens, it was never the plan. When questioning what it was that Nicole and I wanted to do, and we're immersed in California cuisine at this point, it came down to an idea of freedom and flexibility in cooking. And of course, well, what does that translate to? What it ended up translating to was carts and trays and price tags on food that it slowly evolved into state bird. But at the time we didn't know. We just wanted to use everything. We wanted to cook. We kind of were definitely, had become, had embraced our inner hippie. We we were totally in line with these ideas of California cuisine. The cooking that uh, we loved was abundant and delicious based on their ingredients. There was a naturalness to the food, both in its presentation and its preparation. Um, the relationships with farmers, foragers, ranchers, these were not just relationships. These guys were friends. We'd go out and have a beer. We'd go up to their farm and visit and roast off a lamb that was just slaughtered. And for nothing else than just sort of celebrating food. I mean, there was no agenda. And so these relationships have become even more of something. So, again, these are some real common factors in identifying California cuisine. Obviously, we're blessed year-round, long growing season. Our strawberry season begins asparagus season begins pretty consistently right out of the Delta, Zuckerman Farms. Roscoe's got it. He's on the day between the 27th and the 28th of February. It's crazy. And that goes until June, first week of June. How do I know this? Because Meals on Wheels is the first week of June, and 60% of the chefs are serving asparagus dishes still. California cuisine embraces this idea of being around the table, right? We've got a very casual weather. San Francisco is 65 degrees pretty year-round. We have some highs, we have some lows, but on an average, it's 65 degrees. Casual lifestyle. Well, can we say we're casual people? And casual conversations go with this. All of these ideas are really sort of embrace this idea of California cuisine, which really develop what I think is a state of mind and a philosophy that is sensible to that. The current movement is interesting because there's a lot of this, I'm going to cook what I want to eat, right? And this is what's happening. We're now in sort of the fourth, fifth sort of level of California cuisine. What I mean by that is that chefs currently who were cooks on that second or third level, or sous chefs in that fourth level, are now sort of in this new level. And we're writing the book. Our starting place is sort of at the ceiling where these other restaurants and chefs have taken their places too. Thinking places like The Laundry, thinking places like Chez Panisse. And of course they've evolved, but they kind of hit their place. And I'm not saying their plateau or their ceiling, but they hit their place, and that defined the restaurant that they were. And these cooks are starting there, right? That was me, not at The Laundry, but or Chez Panisse for that matter, but in that environment, right? And so that's what you're starting with. I mean, your book is already, you're in chapter 25. So what does that mean? Well, cooks, we're just going to go deeper, right? And, this includes the lengths that we go as cooks for our ingredients. The experimentation that's happening in kitchens right now is phenomenal. There's businesses that are dedicated to the art of fermentation and that are doing incredible work and that are inspiring us all. There's businesses that are dedicated to jamming and preserving and, the abundance of these harvests and kind of creating things. It's inspiring the whole city. And, I got to think the country, because you start seeing it all over. Certainly the ferry building, from a farmer's market perspective, was a pretty significant farmer's market for the country around, because a lot of people come to California and San Francisco as tourists. And that is number one on the list, for sure, for good, for better, for worse. But the better part is what it inspires around the country. You know, the current movement of chefs, I think, are, we're committed to our harvests, right? Many chefs have gardens attached to their restaurants in some way, shape, or form. May not be directly, but it could be 30 minutes out. It's a partnership with a grower. And you're growing things that you can't get, or more importantly, it's small enough where it can still be an incubator for great ideas that grow in the ground, whereas some of our larger farms that have huge staffs now, they can't do that as easily because it's really important. They can bring out every year a couple of new harvests, but what if something doesn't take, right? It's a huge financial risk. But these small kind of gardens that are starting with chefs and restaurants are growing unique things. Espelette peppers, right, from California. Now we've got California Espelette that we're sprinkling over. We've got, you all know Padron peppers. A lot of those started Happy Quail Farms. That guy's a nut for his peppers. And he grows them very consistently to how you'd find them in Spain. The seed banking that goes along in California is unreal. When I travel, I always bring seeds back. And we do have one of those little experimental gardens along with our restaurant. And we try things. Not always to great success. The one that I was most excited about was a trip to Vietnam, and I brought back these wing beans. I thought it would be the coolest thing ever to grow. We got about 6 of them, and they were fibrous and plasticky, and they just were nothing like I had in Vietnam. Well, not everything grows perfectly in California. It does require, you realize this is what's important. As a chef, I bring this back thinking that we can do this. Not true. It teaches you another lesson about the land and about environment and about ingredients that are meant to grow in specific areas. This to me is fascinating, and I hope I feel for me it's a lifelong quest, one that I am totally observant in the garden, and it inspires me now. I look at the garden as an advisor or a sounding board to creativity. You walk through, you all know nasturtiums. Nasturtiums we know as those beautiful little lily pads that have that peppery taste. They put off these beautiful flowers. They also put off little buds that you can turn into little capers, right? But what do you do with that? I like a little bit of flowers in my food, but if you have to put flowers on your food to make it taste great, you're in trouble. That's my philosophy. Something that, but I like the flowers, and they have value, right? But how do they have value? Experimentation comes in. So what do? We go through and we snip all these flowers off the nasturtium, and we get a lot, maybe a gallon of flowers, right? We pour over some fermented turnip juice. We ferment those turnips. We ferment those nasturtium flowers. We dehydrate them. We turn that into a fermented nasturtium flower sour salt. And as I said, that's crazy, right? I mean, it just sounds crazy. I had to think about how that was going to come out. But, the idea of this is that, there's a collaboration going on, right? There's this collaboration and this advisement that the gardens, hey, it's got flowers. They sure are pretty, I got to do something with them, but I really don't want to have a plate of flowers. So that's the idea, right? And because of that idea, I mean, the fermentation things, that comes from another collaborative conversation that's happening, going back to that California casual thing. That's a collaborative conversation that I may have had with Kyle and Kevin, who are the next speakers. Where we're just talking, it's on our mind, right? So these conversations are taking place and they're just on our mind. And as a chef today, honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do with the food that's coming in through the door. You know, I order 40 spot prawns that are just coming out of Half Moon Bay and still flapping. And they come in, and it's like $300 of spot prawns, and you're like, all right, cool. Now what, right? Which sometimes can be really challenging because you're under the gun. You got to use them. I mean, they're not going to be fresher tomorrow, right? You got to use them today. And so you come up with something, and and generally, the way our kitchen works now is that our kitchen's like a little culinary workshop. We just have all these little projects going on for no frickin' reason at all. Like I said, fermented nasturtium flour sour salt. There's no reason for that. There's no inspiration to it. But now it becomes an ingredient in our larder, and it's going to go on a dish somehow, and it's going to become alive. And 3 days later, we're going to be done with it. And that's it. I'm not ordering more nasturtium flowers, right? Spot prawns, yes. But, nasturtium flowers, I may not see those. I feel that the type of cooking that's happening right now, this evolution of the evolvement of California cuisine, is creating very thoughtful cooks. I think it's creating very thoughtful diners. I think it's these, the producers are thoughtful. We're a community. We're a community of one. Education was a big thing. We always heard that, right? Educate your guests, educate your diners. Fuck, man, I'm tired of educating my diners, telling the same story over and over again. I don't know about you. I just want to cook. I just want to serve people. I want to make people happy. I want to make my staff happy. I want to inspire those around me. That is the evolvement of California cuisine. We're not educating anymore. We're just cooking. And through that comes a lot of neat processes. And the pressure is off. I think it's a lot of pressure to educate your diners. But it's not a lot of pressure to do what you love and to cook, right? That's easy. Honestly, that's the best part of my day, is where I can put my apron on, grab a knife, and get to work. The educating part, I don't know. I'm sort of on the fence now about that, because I feel like it's a conversation, and the whole community, the culinary community, at least in the Bay Area, knowingly in the Bay Area, has definitely evolved into that. Some other things that are really neat in the evolvement of California cuisine, and something that Francis briefly touched upon, was about cooks cooking from their own culture, or cooks not cooking from their own culture. Right now, we've got this neat thing happening where we have, obviously, we've got Italian, French, Eastern European, Thai, Vietnamese, Chinese, Japanese, dim sum, that is happening in the Bay Area. And many of these people, these cooks, that's not their birth culture. And they're cooking, and they're inspired from a certain type of cooking, and are cooking with this California cuisine philosophy and the state of mind of great ingredients, of, inspired by what's coming to them to further create. So what you have Japanese izakaya that is using radicchio, right? Which is a trip, because radicchio doesn't work in Japan, or I don't think it does. But it totally makes sense, right? And I think equally as important and really equally as interesting is the fact that you have these, there's a number of chefs who are cooking from their birth culture. Maybe they are immigrants who migrated to California years ago, and now they're adapting California cuisine philosophies into their native cuisine, and it becomes its own cuisine. And that's making up what the Bay Area is now, where it's creating a new authenticity, right? This idea of authentic cooking doesn't exist out of its side of its place. I mean, in Vietnam, you can't, when I was in Vietnam, it's like, how is this reproduced in the States? It's not. But it's absorbed and it's reproduced. It's produced in a way that makes sense for that specific area. I often heard from Vietnamese cooks that pho is better in the States than it is in Vietnam. Do you know why? Our quality of beef, right, is incredible. And so you're getting this sort of beef pho. And I would agree with that after what I tasted, you know. And it's different. It was totally different than what I tasted when I was in Vietnam. When I go to Europe, it's the same thing. I'm tasting food is cooked differently. It's thought about differently, you know. Well, I guess, you know, to kind of conclude a lot of this here, it makes sense that a lot of these conversations are happening in the Bay Area right now, and the evolvement of California cuisine embracing kind of a larger swath of cultures, because that's kind of what California cuisine is, and the people who are there are the ones who are making it, from farmers, you know, from different areas of the world. We have a huge Latino population of farmers who have gone from farming for someone else to their own farm, coming to the market with interesting ingredients that they grow for themselves and have a little extra abundance and bring it and try to sell it. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, fresh peanuts? This is crazy, California. Gailan, unreal. Quilquina, a Bolivian coriander, unreal. And we're starting to see this of a larger variety of these ingredients. And it's coming in, and it's sort of entering the kitchens, and it's going out as thoroughly an evolved California cuisine. That's it. Thanks.